You're listening to Psych with Mike. For more episodes or to connect with the show with comments, ideas, or to be a guest, go to www.psychwithmike.com. Follow the show on Twitter @PsychWithMike or like the Facebook page @PsychWithMike. Now, here's
Welcome to the Psych with Mike Library. This is Dr. Michael Mahan, and I am solo without Mr. Brett Newcomb because he is, as he is wont to do, on assignment traveling. But I have with me Dr. Michael Roussell. He's a teacher, psychologist, and professor emeritus at Southern Oregon University. He completed his doctoral program at the University of Oregon in 1991. Roussell studied life-changing events for over 3 decades and established his expertise by writing the internationally successful book, Sudden Influence: How Spontaneous Events Shape Our Lives in 2007. His pioneering work draws on research from a wide variety of brain sciences that show when, how, and why we instantly form new beliefs. He lives with his spouse in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. And do you prefer Michael or Mike?
I go by lots of names, and so
I hear you. So I'm the same way, but I was thinking about that. So it'll be, hey, Michael, but that's perfectly fine.
Call me Mike, and then the listeners can separate us.
So separate us. Okay, Mike. I wanted to say 2 things before we start. The first one is we're here to talk about the book, The Power of Surprise: How Your Brain Secretly Changes Your Beliefs, which will be linked to both my website, michaelmahan.org, in the resource section, but I'll also have a link in the show notes. The first thing I want to say is this book is excellently written.
Oh, thank you.
As a man who fancies himself a fairly good writer, the challenge is always taking really, really complex information and trying to convey that in a way that anybody who picks up the material can digest and understand. And you do that fantastically.
Thank you.
Yeah. The second thing I want to say is I couldn't be more jealous of you living in Canada. I've never been to Canada. I've always wanted to. My co-host Brett just recently got back from a trip to Canada, and he just could not say enough good things about it.
Well, thank you. And I did listen to the show where he glowed a little bit about Canada, and I must say that I've spent a large part of my career in the U.S., and I am jealous of the U.S. Maybe as much as you're as jealous of Canada. I think we have a wonderful partnership, Canada and the U.S., and that we can now we can flow back and forth again, and right. We really get along well. I get down there and I feel very comfortable, and when the Americans come up here, it's like, hey, it's like good old friends. We've been together for so long now.
Well, this is then a great example of the grass is always greener.
There we go.
So we are going to talk about the power of surprise. I am glad that I'm speaking to you. One of the things that Brett and I always struggle with is I absolutely love geeking out on brain science. And the more technical the science, the more I like it. He doesn't enjoy that. And the truth is, probably a very small segment of the population even really care about the brain science. They just want to know in as few and succinct words as possible what this means to them. You do a great job of that. So I want to get right into it. I've always believed that the way that we form our beliefs, I'm very, very psychodynamic, specifically, just so that you're aware, Heinz Kohut, self-psychology, the formation of attachment and emotional regulation from looking at the example of primary caregivers when you're very young, even a baby. And so I go back all the way to infancy and look for how do our beliefs get formed. But you provided so much information in this book that I didn't know and that was a surprise to me. So I can't wait to get into that. But the first thing that I want to talk about is the opening story of Samuel and how it is that his perceptions of self were really constructed and reinforced by a teacher. And can you talk a little bit about that?
I can, but did you just say you were surprised by the information in my book?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Well, good. Okay. Let me tell you about Samuel. That's the math story in the beginning there. Yeah. Well, I do that as an introduction into dopamine, because dopamine is, just pretty much rules and runs our life. And a lot of people get dopamine wrong. So I use that as an illustration. So let's illustration of how dopamine works, and an illustration of how we form beliefs, because beliefs form and we don't even know. They just happen. From my point of view, from the psychodynamic point of view, it might seem a little different. So with Samuel, he's a little 6-year-old boy and he's in school. And as 6-year-olds do, and all of us do when we're in school, and if work's a little challenging, we struggle with it. So 6-year-old Samuel is struggling with math. And as he struggles with math, the teacher walks by, looks down at him and comments, "Wow, Samuel, you sure struggle with math." Oh, well, he didn't know that, but now he knows he struggles with math. Now that it's been labeled and identified, he struggles with math. So the next time math is out, he knows he struggles with math. That's part of his identity. He's a math struggler. And so what happens with the dopamine, there's two kinds of dopamine. Well, there's many kinds of dopamine, but I'm going to talk about tonic and phasic. So tonic dopamine is basically the motivation signal we have. So it's like this soup that runs through our body. And so now Samuel, his motivation signal with math is low. So his dopamine level just drops a little bit when math comes out, because he struggles. So who wants to struggle? Nobody. So his motivation is low. And so math comes out, problem comes out, he can't get it, he struggles with it, he gives up easily because his motivation is low. And that perpetuates, and a few years later, he's in grade 5, math comes out, well, I'm a math struggler, he gives up easy, doesn't bother with his homework, finds it too difficult, it's a lot easier to get on a device of some sort. And well, let's backtrack that right now to that one moment. Let's go all the way back to the beginning when he's 6 years old and Samuel's struggling with math. And as he's struggling with math, a teacher with some insight into comments and how beliefs form walks by as he's struggling with math, and he says to Samuel, "Wow, you sure stick with it when things are tough. That's the sign of a strong learner." Oh. So if he had heard that comment.
So let me ask you, so then are tonic and phasic, are those the two different ways in which, because you talk in the book about how the dopamine can change slowly or quickly, and then the slow change is the tonic, and then the quick change is the phasic?
That's correct.
Okay.
Correct.
And so do the dopamine levels, do they create motivation, or are they just complementary to it?
The dopamine is motivation. It's a motivation signal. So let's look at Samuel for a minute, because he just heard the comment, "Wow, you're sure staying with it when the going gets tough. That's a sign of a strong learner." So now, who wants to be a strong learner? Well, everybody does, right? So now his motivation level just boosts a little bit. His motivation, his dopamine is a little higher. So now when math comes out, he works hard at math because that's the sign of a strong learner. 5 years later, he's in grade 5 and math comes out. Hey, and he starts to struggle. That's okay, because that's the signs of a strong learner. And he sticks with it. And if you stick with it, are you going to succeed? Probably do better. So it's that snowball effect. And so dopamine, that's tonic dopamine. So if you, I don't know, if you walk into a donut shop, if you like donuts, you're going to go straight, for me, I'm going to go straight to maple.
Gotcha.
Because
Okay.
because I've been there before and I know I like maple. So my dopamine level says, don't waste your time with the glaze, go straight to the maple.
hmm
That's my motivation. That's my tonic motivation signal.
So we could equate that then to a self-fulfilling prophecy. So the language that the teacher uses can become for Samuel a self-fulfilling prophecy, and that is a tonic dopamine change that happens over time. So what's the difference between that and the snap, where you get that supercharge through the phasic level?
Well, okay. So tonic is a tonic level. Tonic dopamine is a motivation signal.
Okay.
Phasic dopamine is an error signal.
Okay, that's where the error message comes in. Gotcha.
Right. So anytime you're surprised, that's an error signal. A surprise is essentially saying, wait, what you expected, what you believe isn't true. Now, from an evolutionary point of view, when you think back to our ancestors, when they were surprised, that usually meant imminent danger or immense opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
So and those that stop to think, is that a tiger in the bushes? Is that an opportunity to gather some food? Those that stop to think perished, along with the gene to think when you're surprised. So those who acted immediately when surprised learned instantly. Well, they made it into the gene pool. So we have this predisposition to learn instantly when surprised. And surprise is now Wolfgang Schultz won the brain prize. I think it was worth like $60,000 or $100,000 back in 2017 out of Cambridge. He won the brain prize for figuring out how phasic dopamine works. It's essentially an error signal. Now, if you think about it, if you I don't know if you have any pandas in your backyard, but if you woke up in the morning and you looked out the backyard and you saw a panda, you'd be surprised because you don't expect pandas to be there. That's phasic dopamine there working. Phasic dopamine is essentially two bursts. That's why it's called phasic. The first base says, stop whatever you're doing, pay attention. Is this dangerous or is this an opportunity? The surprise is the only emotion that requires an interpretation. When you're fearful, you know it. When you're happy, you know it. When you're surprised, what the hell is going on?
So let me ask you a question about my understanding of the dopamine channel. And now we're going to get a little bit into the weeds, and hopefully people will be able to track this and it'll be helpful. But my background is through substance abuse. And so, I've always been taught that the dopamine channel runs through the prefrontal cortex into the nucleus accumbens, and that sends signals to the amygdala. So are we still on that reward track? Is that still the brain structures that we're lighting up? We're just talking about that they can be lit up in different ways?
You're talking addictions can be addictions are physiological, and the dopamine in addictions is going to operate. Now, dopamine does many things.
Okay.
And I'm going to talk about the tonic and the phasic.
Okay.
And the dopamine in addictions works differently.
So that may be a different channel. Gotcha.
Right. And
so
I want to talk about the tonic and phasic, at least my book's about the tonic and phasic and how that works with beliefs, particularly beliefs you have about yourself.
Okay, let's take our break real quick, and we're going to come back, and I'm going to ask you another question about that.
All right, thank you.
One of the reasons that I want to participate in this show is because it gives me an opportunity to clinically review my understanding of what therapy is and how it works, especially for the consumer. So my hope is that we will find conversations that broaden my understanding of that.
And my hope is that we do that in a way that is useful but also entertaining for people, so that they want to listen, not only because they're getting good psychology information, but because they just enjoy the show.
Easy listening with an informational twist.
So that's a new tagline.
They're not sitting there going, Huh?
Easy listening with an informational twist.
I'm really good at this. I'm a professional
You're
here.
a professional. If it's Friday, it's Psych with Mike.
Okay, we're back. And so one of the things that really was new and elucidating for me was this idea of the error message. So that's that phasic dopamine. And
Yes.
that to me that was just so enlightening, because all of us, just like you talked about the story with the pandas, if I woke up, there were pandas in my backyard, that would be so outside of the expectation that I would have. Everybody knows what that feels like. And what you're saying then is that whatever you think about that is going to now be almost instantly a crystallized belief.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
There are some nuances here. I can't, excuse me, I won't be able to cover the entire book
Mm-hmm.
here, but what I will say, let me just introduce some of the nuances and then get to the really fun, interesting part that we
Okay.
can use as therapists here, because I know there's lots of therapists listening to your show.
Mm-hmm.
So let's just look back at the panda for a moment. So this panda goes running through your backyard. Boom! Surprise! Now that's phase one. Phasic is two phases.
Mm-hmm.
Phase one is salience, just like what just happened, something really important. So pay attention and learn
Mm-hmm.
instantly. So that's phase one. It lasts less than a second. It's like 311 milliseconds. Is some, so it's less than a second. That just alerts you to stop what you're doing, pay attention.
Mm-hmm.
And then phase two is the tonic dopamine. Our friend Tonic, which is the motivation
Mm-hmm.
signal. Our friend Tonic says, okay, make some meaning out of this and learn instantly. And that's that approach avoid.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a good thing, is it a bad thing? And then learn instantly is form a belief. So this all takes place very quickly. Now the tonic, that lasts. That's the form of
Mhm.
belief, and then live with that belief. And that's what I think you used the term crystallizes right there.
Mhm.
So let's look in slow motion. So you saw that panda, and then now you have to make meaning of that.
Mhm.
So was that a friend dressed up as a panda playing a trick
Mhm.
on me? Is that a panda escaped from a zoo? What's just going on here? Maybe that's my imagination. That wasn't a panda. That was just
Mhm.
some guy walking. It could have been a cow, an
Mhm.
escaped cow, a black and white cow. Who knows? You don't know. So you have to make meaning of that.
Mhm.
And so you run outside. You don't see any pandas anywhere. You don't see, unless you have snow like we do in Canada, you won't see any panda tracks. So,
Right.
so you got to figure this out. You're going to go to work, and that's on your mind all day.
Mhm.
You're going to say, "Hey, did you see a panda? I saw a panda."
Mm.
And then you come home at night, and you turn on the news, and there was a zoo break. And there was a panda, a gorilla, and an anaconda. You're happy it was just the panda that was in your backyard.
Mhm. Mhm. Gotcha.
You make meaning now. Now you figured it out. Like none of that changed you. It
Mhm.
was just an exciting event that you could talk about. Now,
But that whole day while I'm thinking about the event is actually that's that tonic dopamine. It's reinforcing then whatever belief that I'm ultimately going to land on is being reinforced because I'm thinking about it over and over again all day.
it's curiosity because
Mhm.
dopamine drives the curiosity, and it keeps on building and building and building until finally you get this resolution, and then it was a zoo break, and now
Mhm.
it's just an interesting story that you can tell.
Mhm.
All right, now as interesting as that is, that explains how surprise works. But I don't study those kinds of surprises. I find them interesting, but the really cool surprises, the ones that we can use as therapists and parents and coaches, teachers, the really cool ones are surprises to our self-esteem, our self-image, particularly our self-image. So let me give you a really simple example, and then I'll run right through it so you can see how the panda example works, but a little differently with a person. And so Lori, a young teenager, 12 years old, 13 years old, she used to believe she was ungraceful and odd looking.
Mhm.
So that's low dopamine when she's out in public, right? So now, one night she overhears her aunt talking to her friend who's a model, who describes, she overhears it. She describes her, Lori, as exotic looking.
Mm-hmm.
The comment surprised her.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this is a real story. I met Lori. I know Lori. The comment surprised her.
Mm-hmm.
And she told me ever since then, she thought, exotic looking. So she embraced her different looks, and she wore her head proudly, and she moved around proudly. And what that does is it perpetuates that belief. So now her tonic level rises just a little bit. So now she's out in public. Prior to this, when she thought she was ungraceful and odd looking, if she was walking through the mall and somebody cast a glance her way, she would see that glance and think, oh, they think I'm ungraceful and odd looking. So it perpetuates itself. Now, when she walks through the mall and same person casually glances that way at her, she thinks, oh, they find me attractive, exotic looking. So once you have a belief, as you know, beliefs affirm themselves, as we all know. It's called confirmation bias. We can't avoid it. We have a belief. We see evidence of the belief everywhere. It's who we are. It's how we work. And so when we look back at Lori, because it surprised her, it was phasic dopamine, phase one. Stop, pay attention, learn a belief instantly. She makes meaning of it, yes. While you had to wait all day to make meaning of your panda, she learned in an instant, oh, I'm exotic looking. Now, all this takes place unconsciously. She never thought about that event until she was in one of my graduate classes. And I said, tell me about a belief. Tell me about a time that changed your life. See, I studied formative events for over 30 years. And it was only 5 years ago that I looked and I found, oh, the precursor for most of these formative events in people's lives was a surprise. And so that's when and we didn't know about that until.
Is surprise then, does that play a role in how trauma can affect us?
Yes and no. Trauma is different, but trauma always comes with extreme emotional arousal. And with extreme emotional arousal, sometimes that's triggered by a surprise. I would say, that's an interesting question, and I haven't given it much thought, but I'm going to run with this, think on the go here. And I think with trauma, when we are traumatized, most of the time it's because it was a surprise. The part of it is the surprise. We didn't expect to be traumatized.
Right.
So here's this surprise trauma. And what surprise does is it creates phase one of phasic. What it does is it creates neural plasticity, instant neural plasticity. The brain has to figure out what's going on. So instead of and dopamine is dopamine is the neurotransmitter that creates associations. So when you're traumatized with a surprise, there's this instant association. Oh, I'm a bad person. This is dangerous. Whatever association you make, that would be the trauma that takes place.
So is neuroplasticity always created during that phasic stage?
Any kind of extreme emotional arousal is going to trigger neuroplasticity, because you have to make a new association, and associations are driven through dopamine. And so I just speaking on the go here, I would think with trauma, you have this surprising event, and then it's immediately assessed as avoid.
Right.
There's this new belief that comes out of this. And if somebody's there to say, oh, that was a stupid thing to do, then that becomes your solution. I guess I'm stupid.
Exactly. Yeah, I've used that
or,
example.
or if somebody says,
Mhm.
wow, you sure got out of that with your quick thinking and attention to detail.
Mhm.
Oh, I got out of that with quick thinking and attention to detail. So the trauma happened, but the belief was I survived because attention to detail, not stupid. So, and that's what happens with a surprise, is that typically the first thing you hear after a surprise can become crystallized, whether it's trauma or, in Lori's case, something very positive, where, oh, I'm exotic looking.
Right.
It tends to be the first thing that we grasp hold of, because this not knowing is a psychological state of unease.
But I think that this is, for me, is confirming some of the things that, I've thought for a long time, which is that most of us, most human beings, want to be good parents. I mean, our goal is to be good parents. Our goal is to give our children better lives than we had. But we don't often think about how even subtle behaviors as a parent may be impacting the developing child. So if you have a child's brain, which is already super plastic, and then you have an event that causes surprise, increases the level of plasticity, the next thing the primary caregiver says is going to really be seminal in crystallizing the belief of that child. And, so if the child spills their milk and you say, oh, why'd you spill your milk? What are you, stupid? Well, bam, all of a sudden now the child says, oh, I spilled my milk because I'm stupid. And if the parent says, oh, you spilled your milk, that's okay, I'll clean it up, then what the child believes is going to be very different. And I'm not saying that anybody can regulate themselves in real time always perfectly, but I think that it's really important for parents to think about those kinds of events. They're creating the reality. And, this is one of the things, and we may end up ending on this, that you say in the book that, your beliefs are always correct because they're yours. Yes. And that's something that when I'm working with couples or with an adolescent who is struggling with self-esteem, that I always tell people is, it doesn't matter what you believe, you're right, and you would pass a lie detector test even if everybody else in the world disagrees.
That's right.
And so the first thing that you have to do, so if you're a person who has some beliefs that you think are not life enhancing, maybe life inhibiting, then the first thing that you have to do is to try and challenge those. So what's the best way for us to encourage people to do that?
Wow, and that's a great finish. Thank you. Let me comment about your spilled milk story.
Yeah.
Because I recall a story from, his name was Stephen, and he was one of the rocket scientists, and I can't remember his last name for now, but I do remember the story. Is he actually spilled some milk when he was a little boy, and he was, oh my goodness. And his mom walked into the room, saw, and he was, uh-oh, I'm going to get in trouble here. And his mom said, oh, look at the patterns on the floor.
Right.
Look at, let's figure out how the patterns, and she started pounding on the milk to see the patterns on the floor. And he credits that to his drive for creativity and imagination that brought, and eventually ended up as an engineer and a rocket scientist. So that's exactly what you were saying there, Michael. And he credits that as a turning point in his life at 6 years old.
Right.
So thank you for bringing that up.
Well, I don't know, and I'll let you go on after, but when I was an undergraduate at St. Louis University in the 1980s, I remember my first physiological psychology class, and we were told that there were about 100 million neurons in the brain, 120 million neurons, and that, after about age, and back then they were saying age 12 to 14, you were pretty much set in stone. You didn't get any new neurons, and if you killed them, then you were just out of luck. We didn't understand the plasticity of the brain the way we do today. And it's great that our brains are so plastic. It's fantastic. It's really beneficial for us. but it's something that we just didn't understand until we had the fidelity of technology to be able to look at those things more closely.
Oh yeah, you know,
Yeah.
the explosion in brain research and fMRIs and
Mhm.
everything that's going on, the brain prizes, basic dopamine, we are starting to figure it out. We got a long way to go, as
We
you
got a
know.
long way to go.
Hey, so I know we're running short on time, so
Yeah.
let me tell you know, what's the value unless you have some practical use here.
Mhm.
There's lots of practical uses, but let me just tell you that from my point of view, Burton wrote a book recently, and I can't remember what it's about, but it's about I can't remember the title. It's about conviction. Conviction
Mhm.
of your belief. Conviction is a feeling you have, and you can't change. As you know, you can't talk people out of their feelings. You can't talk people out of their beliefs.
Right.
So, you know, talk therapy has its limitations. We know that cognitive behavioral therapy is good. What cognitive behavioral therapy is trying to do is to get your self-talk to
Mhm.
change it from low dopamine, I'm a bad person, or I can't do this well, or whatever it is, and you try to self-talk, oh yes you can, oh yes you can. So you're trying to change tonic dopamine into a
Mhm.
belief of approach rather than avoid. Surprise can do that instantly and artfully. I'm
Mhm.
not saying don't use cognitive behavioral therapy for
Mhm.
those of you who use it. I use it for myself when I need to change my thinking, when I recognize my thinking is an obstacle.
Mhm.
But what happens in a surprise is you can instantly change. Remember Lori with the
Mhm.
ungraceful and odd looking? She changed her tonic dopamine in an instant, or she didn't change it,
Mhm.
but it changed in an instant, which is what cognitive behavioral therapy is trying to do.
Right.
So anytime you're in a therapeutic situation and somebody is telling you their story, and you know that you see that blockage as a therapist, and whatever that blockage is, what's the opposite of that blockage? Is
Mhm.
it if they think you know, I learn things too slowly, and what's the opposite of that? How can you use that in a
Mhm.
surprise comment? So
Mhm.
so if someone thinks, oh, I learned things so slowly, and then you laugh at them, or you giggle,
Mhm.
or you go, what? You do something that gets their attention.
Mhm.
And when you do that, they're surprised.
Right.
And then they have to make sense of the next thing that comes
Mhm.
out of your mouth. And
Mhm.
so the person who's thinking about, oh, I do things so, I learn things so slowly. And you go, what?
Mhm.
I've never met anybody who learns things so thoroughly.
Mhm. No, you're right on, and I know that I've been doing that in therapy without understanding what I was doing. But the cognitive behavior, the change in self-talk is a tonic change, and that can
Yes.
be effective if the individual can practice it over a long period of time. But the way in which we really want to try and help that individual is, if we can, to try and find phasic ways of being able to drop something in that's surprising. But you know, now that you're saying that, that's why. So I'm old. And when I was in school, they called exposure therapy systematic desensitization.
Yes.
But that's why, so I'm saying that for people who are younger, that your exposure therapy and systematic desensitization, they're the same thing. But that's why it works, is because you're presenting that surprise stimulus in a way that you're trying to train that individual to be more comfortable with, and it changes foundationally a belief system.
They're surprised that they
Yeah.
survived, but they didn't think they would
Mhm.
survive. That's
Mhm.
the surprise. Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. And I'm glad you brought that up, Michael, because you've been doing therapy all these years and everything, and you know, and every once in a while you say something and it's short and it's
Mhm.
sweet, and you see, oh, there it is. You
Mhm.
see the change. And you probably said something that surprised that person. We don't always
Mhm.
know or see what the surprise is,
Right.
but as a trained therapist, someone with experience, you've seen that.
Mhm.
And
And one of
and
the
now we
things.
have a model for actually creating that and
Mhm.
looking for those opportunities. So when I don't do therapy anymore, but when I do, I'm always looking for that opportunity to say something, to reframe in a different way. But when you reframe, if you can do it in a surprise, like, what are you talking about? That's the most thorough learning I know. Anytime you do that, you can watch the wheels spin, watch the new beliefs form.
So thank you so much for this. This has been even better than I would have ever imagined. We have barely scratched the surface. I would love to stay in touch and do this again sometime, because it's been fantastic. What we've been talking about is the power of surprise, how your brain secretly changes your beliefs. There'll be a link to this on my website, michaelmahan.org, but also in the show notes. And I just wanted to say again, Mike, thank you so much. And I hope that this is something that you've enjoyed and you'd be willing to do again. As always, the music that appears in Psych with Mike is written and performed by Mr. Benjamin DeClue. You can follow us at Psych with Mike on Facebook, at Psych with Mike on Twitter. And as always, if it's Friday, it's Psych with Mike.
Thank you, Mike. Thanks for the invitation to the show.
Oh, you are so welcome. So I am going to hit the stop record.
Okay, me too.
And see if it surprises me.